Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans. I'm Matthew DeSantis, and this is the Win Place Show, a podcast devoted to all aspects of horse racing and handicapping that is proudly part of the Amalfi Media Network. Today, we're going to preview the stakes races taking place at Aqueduct on the Friday after Thanksgiving, which include the Grade 3 Comely Stakes as well as the Gio Ponte Stakes. And to top it off, I will be joined by a guest handicapper, Sara Elbadwi of Outrun the Odds, and a New York racing aficionado to give her perspective on the races as well. Now, before we break it all down, just a quick reminder to follow, download, rate, review, and share the Win Play Show on the podcast platform of your choice. And also make sure to subscribe to the Win Play Show on our YouTube channel. Aside from today's preview, we have a lot of other content coming out this week. Just yesterday, I released my preview of the Friday's Grade 1 Clark Stakes at Churchill Downs that features a loaded card, including Midnight Bourbon, Maxfield, and others. And then I'll have my traditional Friday preview for the big Saturday at Del Mar, where I preview the Grade 1 Hollywood Derby, the Grade 2 Seabiscuit Handicap, and the Grade 3 Jimmy Durante Stakes. And there will be a huge $20,000 stable duel contest on Saturday at Del Mar, so I'll have some more information on that for Friday's preview. So I have you covered for the entire Thanksgiving holiday. In case you're traveling a lot, in case you need a break from the in-laws, pop on the podcast, watch a little bit on YouTube. We got you covered. And if you don't have time to handicap the entire card, no worries. We got you. Remember, you can go to amalfimedia.com to get my picks for all of the races on the cards that I preview. So make sure to go there and get everything you need to have you covered for the Thanksgiving holiday. Finally, make sure to interact with us on Twitter and on YouTube. We always appreciate hearing back from fans and listeners to let me know how you think the races are going to play out on Friday at Aqueduct and share with your fellow horse racing fanatics on social media. Okay, well, let's dive into the races at Aqueduct with my guest handicapper today, Sara Elbadwi from Outrun the Odds, who's a great Twitter follow at the handle at Outrun the Odds, catchy title, which you can find linked below the video or in the episode notes. People throughout the industry are always lamenting about how young people don't get involved, and there needs to be more young people in horse racing. And Sara is one of those young voices in horse racing and handicapping, and really enjoys following the New York racing scene. So it's a pleasure to get to chat with her about a track where she's very familiar, Aqueduct, which is a track that I really just kind of drop into for big races. So it'll be nice to get her expertise. So with that being said, let's bring Sara onto the podcast and get into some handicapping. Welcome, Sara. Thank you so much for coming on the Win Place Show pod. Really appreciate your time and your expertise for today's preview of the races at Aqueduct. And I just want to let the people out there know Sara's got a great Twitter follow at Outrun the Odds. And Sara, why don't you let people know a little bit about the content that you're putting out there and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited. And you can follow me on Twitter, as Matthew said, at Outrun the Odds. I'm also starting a YouTube channel under my name, Sara Elbadwi, with some video previews of different races coming up, mostly on the New York circuit. And then I'm also going to have a website, outruntheodds.com. That's coming soon. It's still under works right now, but should be available shortly.
That's great. That's wonderful. And you know, one of the things I always hear people lamenting online and just even at the track is getting young people involved and engaged in horse racing and handicapping and betting and this sort of thing. And so you are the stereotypical young person. So I'm going to just kind of ask you, how did you get interested in horse racing and particularly kind of the handicapping side of horse racing?
Yeah, I totally agree. There's no one my age doing this, which is unfortunate, and I hope to
it is.
That. But we had a family friend growing up. I didn't really grow up in a racing or horse family, but we had this one family friend that loved the sport, and was quite the avid gambler as well. And she was always hosting her own Kentucky Derby parties, and every year I just remember it was the most fun to go, and everyone was so involved and so interested, and whatever was happening was the most exciting thing ever. And I always loved the horses, and I grew up riding as well. And so to really see them put their heart on the line and run so well and be so in love with their jobs. And, not all of them are, but some of them, it's just like
Yeah.
watching the most beautiful thing in the world. And then I was like, oh my God, you can make money if you pick out who's going to win. This is the best thing ever. So I've just been hooked ever since.
That's great. That's really wonderful. And I think that's where a lot of it starts for many of us, is just getting introduced as a kid and having somebody in our lives who's also enthusiastic about it. And that enthusiasm usually spreads and spreads to other people. So when you are handicapping, and you've been doing this for a while, are there any kind of hard and fast rules or any tips that you would tell people, who may just be starting out in terms of picking horses and following horse racing? What are some, like I said, maybe some general rules or tips for beginners that you found helpful in your experience?
I can't say that I always follow my own rule, but it's really just trust yourself. There's so much
Yeah.
information out there, and everyone has different opinions, and everyone's doing their own research, and taking all of those things into consideration, but still realizing that, you have your own ideas and your own opinions and your own gut instinct about what's going to happen. And, you might have a little bit more authority than you think that you do. And so that balance between all of the information coming at you on the outside and how you feel on the inside about something, and just really always making sure you're following yourself and listening to yourself.
Absolutely. I think that's phenomenal advice. And I couldn't agree more. And just this past weekend, I had a situation where I probably should have believed in myself a little bit more than I.
We've all been there. They're all the time.
I know. I had a 25-1 long shot who I absolutely loved at Del Mar, and he ended up winning. And I was like, oh, I really like this horse. And then I didn't mention it, and I didn't play it in Stable Duel, and I was just kicking myself afterwards.
Right.
But, what are you going to do? You live and learn. But
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, a lot of times when and what I've found in my experiences, especially when you get into handicapping a little bit more, if you do find yourself kind of going through a cold streak, and everybody goes through them, it's usually because there's too much noise in the system, so to speak. You're trying to take into consideration too many things, or you're trying to listen to too many other people. And what I've always found is helpful is just going back to what you do best, what you believe in best, the metrics you focus on, and kind of doing that and doing your thing, and kind of keeping some of the outside noise out. But
For sure.
yeah, I think that's great advice, because you're right. It can be overwhelming for a first time person just looking at a racing form.
Oh, yeah.
It can be, a mind boggling experience. So you've been following the New York racing scene, and so I kind of drop in and drop out of Aqueduct, but I just didn't know if there were any kind of trends that you've seen at Aqueduct this season. I know it's just started, or kind of any trainers or jockeys that are particularly hot at Aqueduct, or anything about that track that maybe you've been following for a while.
I mean, I think the biggest thing to notice there is the paceless turf races, which plenty of people have talked about at nauseum, and that always
Yeah.
kind of like makes you like, oh, what's happening? But I will say that on Sunday there were much livelier paces than I've seen in a little while. So maybe they're finally getting the memo that riding the speed horses on the front end might be a better decision than raiding everybody behind. But it's something to keep in mind, because it
Yeah.
happens at every New York track, and I don't know
Yeah.
why, and I don't think anyone has any particular answer, but if you have a horse that wants to be on the lead and might get away with like a 24 and 50 or something like that, it could happen.
Yeah, I know. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. I mean, that's been frustrating up at Saratoga, at Belmont. You're right. Across New York, it's just a very slow pace early on a lot of times. And no matter what the racing sheet says,
Oh, yeah.
it can be a very slow pace. So, well, with that said, let's get into some of the races today. And I will, before we dive into the Gio Ponte Stakes, I will preview and just kind of go over that field very quickly. And for the folks listening, that is 1.16 miles on the inner turf for 3-year-olds. It's an 8-horse field. Coming in at post position 1 is Gio, a German horse trained by Mike Maker and jockeyed by Manny Franco. Then Gussie Mack, trained by Niall Seville and jockeyed by Jorge Vargas Jr. Original, trained by John Terranova and jockeyed by Javier Castellano. Then a main track only entry, Boldish, trained by Linda Rice and jockeyed by Eric Consell. And then Ocala Dream, trained by Thomas Morley and jockeyed by Dylan Davis. Never Surprised, a Todd Pletcher horse, jockeyed by Kendrick Carmouche. Safe Conduct, a Philip Serpy horse, jockeyed by Jose Lezcano. And then finally, Monition, trained by Cherie DeVoe and jockeyed by Louis Saez. So Sara, with the Gio Ponte Stakes, I'll kind of turn things over to you. Where are you looking in this particular race? Or are there certain horses that stand out to you either for good or for bad?
Well, I think one horse that's not in this race that you kind of have to mention is Public Sector, because I feel like he's kind of the yardstick with which to measure a lot of these buys, since a lot of them have raced against him, either beating him or finishing second to him repeatedly. And so I think that that's something that Never Surprised is probably excited about, that he's not going to be in here after a couple consecutive seconds to him. And I think that Never Surprised might also end up being your early leader, since apparently the decision has been made to rate Original for his last two races. And I know something happened two back and he ended up being pulled up. But in his last start, he wasn't anywhere near the pace, and he usually had been the one setting those very tepid fractions early on. And so with that not being his game plan anymore, or so it seems, I think that Never Surprised might get to be that kind of early leader. Whether those fractions end up being, reasonable or heating up in any way, kind of remains to be seen. And I'm thinking most likely not.
Mm-hmm.
So especially with Kendrick riding, you have to think that he's probably going to the lead. But I would say that my top pick in here is going to be the 7, Safe Contact. That's your Queen's Plate winner. That is your horse that is undefeated at this distance, actually, even though he's only, won twice on it. So he's only tried it twice. But now he's cutting back from 12 furlongs, and maybe he just doesn't want to go that far. And he was also facing Grade 1 company back, a couple races ago in the Jockey Club Invitational. So I think he's getting a little bit of class relief. He's getting back to a distance that he might prefer. And I think that, he's poised to run a pretty big race.
Yeah, I agree with you. Safe Conduct is a horse that really stands out for me. And it should be noted that the forecast, and we're recording this on Tuesday morning, and so the forecast could change significantly by Friday. But there is supposed to be some rain in the forecast at Aqueduct on Friday. The weather's supposed to be very nice leading up to that, so I don't think it'll have a huge impact on the turf. But just something to note, Safe Conduct does not take well to yielding turf or really sloppy conditions, as evidenced by some pretty poor performances on those types of surfaces in the past. But like I said, I don't anticipate that being an issue this time out. I will kind of focus on a horse that I think is interesting, which is Monition. Anybody who's watched this show for a while knows that I have a type, and my type is a lightly raced horse with improving speed numbers, and that is stepping up in distance, or stepping up in class, I should say. I think usually you can find a lot of value with horses like that that might end up surprising people. Obviously, I have a lot of confidence in Luis Saez, the jockey. I also like Monition because it's won its two races in two very different ways. One time was a clear front-running effort the last time out, where it just kind of wired the field and pulled away late. And the other time was coming from well behind, off the pace, and winning with ease. So I like that there's some versatility here. The horse has been working out well down at Keeneland. I just think you might be able to get a little bit of a value there. But certainly, Safe Conduct and then Never Surprised, I think, are the two horses that do really stand out. From a speed number standpoint, and also just from a class standpoint. I mean, Never Surprised, you mentioned Public Sector. I mean, yeah, the connections have to be thrilled.
Right.
The Public Sector is not in this race because he's lost by kind of a length and a neck the last two times out to that horse. So, and it's got some of the best speed numbers in the field. Another horse that you mentioned, Original, and I'm curious, kind of, do you think there's just something off on that horse, or because that's a horse that really was running pretty nicely and then kind of clipped heels and walked off with the Hall of Fame and just looked like a completely different horse, the Hill Prince. And if the horse reverts back to the way it was running 3 races ago, I think it's got a shot, but I just don't know how to feel about Original.
I think he's definitely the biggest question mark in this field, because I saw that happen in the Hall of Fame, and then I was like, oh no, like, is he okay? And then they bring him back and he's not the same. And maybe he's not the same because of something mental, whereas like now he's kind of, not really taking that spot where he used to be walking on the lead. Maybe that's a connections idea that they don't want him in that position anymore. Maybe there's something going on that hasn't been, diagnosed yet underneath the surface. Who knows? But I think with you mentioning the rain as well, that would actually benefit him because he's won on yielding turf before. So if he could be that same horse that he used to be, he's definitely a player. but with his last two performances, I wouldn't really be taking that shot with him. But back to what you said about Monition, I think he's very dangerous in this spot. And I love what you said too, as well, about him, running in two different types of styles to show that he's versatile. And I think that that's definitely important on the turf, especially because it's so much about trip and he can definitely make his own. And that makes him such a big player here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You got to make your own luck on turf a lot of times. So,
Sure.
having that versatility is important. And I will just say, Kijo and Gussie Mack, it's kind of rare to fade the international horses in a turf race, but neither of these horses really stand out to me too much. Kijo's making its North American debut, a perfectly fine horse, but doesn't seem like nothing that really jumps off the page that makes me think it would be a contender. And the same thing with Gussie Mack. So, I know people listening and watching will, inevitably think, well, that's a European horse. They must be, because we've seen such domination from the Europeans on turf in America this year, particularly even in Saratoga earlier this summer. So, but these are not. This is not Summer Romance. This is not Off Peak. No, it's not quite the same.
Right.
These are not Charlie Appleby horses. So, So your pick is, if I'm not mistaken, was Safe Conduct. Is that who you have up top? Okay.
That's definitely my top pick.
Very good. Well, for me, I am going to roll the dice, and I'm going to go with Monition to win. I got Safe Conduct to place, and I've never surprised to show. I do agree with you that Original is the biggest question mark in this field, and depending on what those odds look like, maybe I throw a couple bucks on Original in some capacity, but that's how I kind of see the Gio Ponte playing out. So let's move to the other, I shouldn't say the other, it is the graded stakes race on the day, the Grade 3 Cumley Stakes. And before we go into talking about this race, let's go over the field. It's a 1.125 miles on dirt for 3-year-old fillies. And this is another 8-horse field. Coming in at the post position 1 is Hybrid Eclipse, trained by Linda Rice and jockeyed by Dylan Davis. And then 90% Burn, trained by Robert Reed Jr. and jockeyed by Eric Consell. Shalimar Gardens, trained by Horatio De Paz and jockeyed by John Velasquez. Then you really have probably the 3 favorites coming in at 4, 5, 6 post. Crazy Beautiful, trained by Ken McPeak and jockeyed by Kendrick Carmouche. Played Hard, trained by Philip Bauer and jockeyed by Martin Garcia. Army Wife, trained by Mike Maker and jockeyed by Luis Saez. Then you have Bees and Honey, trained by Shug McGahee and jockeyed by Jose Lezcano. And then finally, Vegas Weekend, trained by Rob Atras and jockeyed by Manny Franco. So I already tipped my hand a little bit, but Sarah, where do you look in this Cumley Stakes for your winner, or what are some of the horses that are intriguing to you?
I think it's very hard to look past the 4, 5, and 6, but I actually think I kind of want to take a shot with the 3, Shalimar Gardens, and
we agree. I love it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like just your type, lightly raced, like you mentioned with the Gio Ponte. So I think it's really interesting that Johnny Velasquez is getting aboard. And, I think that her 4th last time out in the Lexus Raven Run wasn't really that bad of a performance. And I think that she has a running style that's probably complementary to this field, because it looks like, on paper at least, that there's a couple horses that might want to be in that earlier flight or be pressing the pace here, like Crazy Beautiful, Played Hard, probably even Army Wife will want to be up close. And if she gets kind of a better setup this time out, I think that she could be running late, and I think she might be the only one that's doing so.
Yeah, I agree. This could be a pretty hot pace in this particular race, and you're right. There could end up being a little bit of a competition between those, really the big 3 of Played Beautiful and, Crazy Beautiful, Played Hard, and Army Wife. You said everything I was going to say about Shalimar Gardens. I completely agree, and I think that was a good. That was a really good Ravens Run field. Certainly Caramel Swirl's a very good horse who ended up winning that race. I think this horse, Shalimar Gardens, actually has only run a mile in terms of the longest distance. But you look at the pedigree, I don't think there's any issue with distance for Shalimar Gardens. So I don't have many concerns there. It's been working out nicely at Belmont. So I like that. I think you might be able to get a little bit of a price there at Shalimar Gardens. I'll be interested to see certainly what the morning line is. But I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about, the 4, 5, 6. And certainly looking at Army Wife. That's a horse that I remember watching in person at the Cotillion Stakes at Parks. That was on Pennsylvania Derby Day. And very classy. I mean, able to get a piece of the board at both the Alabama and the Cotillion. This is a horse that's won consistently at the grade 2 and grade 3 level. Distance won't be an issue. I think is probably a class above a horse like Played Hard, particularly if, there's too hot of a pace. I could see Played Hard kind of fading a little bit down the stretch. And then Crazy Beautiful also, is I think an interesting horse, ran, won the grade 3 back in July, won a grade 2 in May, ran a nice second at a grade 3 on yielding turf, which was really surprising to see the horse run so well on turf after running so well on dirt. And so, I think that's interesting. Vegas weekend, I don't have a lot of faith in, but it is an interesting horse that's 8 for 8 hitting the board, 5 for 8 winning, but just has never run anywhere near this level of competition before, and just ran 2 weeks ago after a really long layoff. So I don't love that combination. I know sometimes, we like to go price hunting on this show, but that's not one where I would necessarily go. But I'm curious, kind of out of those 3 in that 4, 5, 6, Played Hard, Army Wife, Crazy Beautiful, do you have 1 or 2 that you maybe like more than the others?
I would say that I've always been more of a fan of Army Wife. I've definitely, made some money with her before. And I think that, whereas like Crazy Beautiful and Played Hard might kind of like, jostle with each other for the lead as they did 2 back for Crazy Beautiful before her turf try. I think that Army Wife, it might be more intent on getting that lead. I know that she hasn't really been pushed to run really fast opening fractions in the past, but I think that like she might end up being the speed of the speed, and that's always an advantageous place to be. I've never been a huge fan of Crazy Beautiful. I think she was always kind of, after we see Ken McPeak with Swiss Skydiver, it's kind of like the little sister that's trying to like fill those shoes. And, those are big shoes to fill. And that might be completely unfair of me to, be making that comparison. But I think like after we saw that horse come from his barn, that she's always kind of been maybe a little bit underwhelming in terms of, sort of that comparison. And that's kind of the talks that they were, putting her in conversations with that horse. And I've never really looked at her to be in that same category. Not that she's not totally talented and very, obviously kind of the class of this field, I would even say. But I think that in here you have a lot of horses stepping up and a lot of horses stepping down. And so they're kind of all like meeting in the middle. And then Vegas Weekend, who you mentioned too, I used her in my pick 5 that I won that day when she was making her first start off a little bit of a freshening. So I'm obviously a fan of hers, and thank you to her. But I think that this is maybe a little bit out of depth for her, though you have to consider a horse that's coming in off of 4 wins in a row, even if they aren't in the same field.
Yeah. And likes to have that, likes to kind of come from off the pace too, a little bit, sit stalking or sit kind of a little, it might in this particular race probably will be sitting a little further back. And so if there is kind of an unreasonable speed fraction up front and things start to fall to pieces, it's a horse that could benefit and run into something, certainly, and kind of catch a piece of the board coming down the stretch or something along those lines. And should have a pretty big price there too. Right. I agree with you about Army Wife. I mean, I think that's just a horse that has run up against the best. I mean, has run up against Clairiere and Obligatory and Malafat. And I mean, just has run against some really good horses. And that's something I typically look at is this is a horse that's getting pretty significant class release. And this is a horse that held her own with those horses. I mean, did not get outclassed. Stepping down in class here and getting some relief, I think is definitely will be helpful. But this is still a pretty strong field for a grade 3, honestly, for 3-year-old fillies. This is a nice field. So ultimately, who do you have up top in this particular race?
I would say that my top pick would be Shalimar Gardens. And then for my place, I would say Army Wife. And then for a little bit of a long shot in third, I would go with Vegas Weekend.
I love it. You're bolder than I am because I went more chalk. I went with Army Wife up top. I went with Shalimar Gardens to place, and I went with Crazy Beautiful to show. But the more we talk about Vegas Weekend, the more I can kind of be sold on that horse potentially coming in and hitting that board in third. That's That's an intriguing play. So I like that. But I like that I love Shalimar Gardens, and then you're the one who picks it to win, and I pick it to
Yeah,
finish
yeah,
second.
yeah.
So yeah,
See, trust
goes
yourself.
exactly. I was just going to say that. It goes back to what Sarah said at the very beginning. I should trust myself more often. So
Maybe I'm wrong,
maybe
but still.
no, we both can't be wrong on this one. So no, I like it. So well, excellent. Well, Sarah, I would just want to say thank you again for coming on. And just remind everyone again where they can find you on social media, and remind everybody about some of the stuff you have coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure you follow me on Twitter at Outrun the Odds, and stay tuned for my website. It's just outruntheodds.com. And my YouTube channel is under Sara Elbadwi, Elbadwi.
Awesome. And Sarah, I have to say, great Twitter follow. Very fun to, she's great, very active on social media. Really enjoy following her. And it helps me out a lot because I'm not always able to plug into that New York racing scene. She's always got great advice. So a big thank you again, Sarah, for coming on. Really appreciate it. And look forward to us maybe chatting again about horses in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this preview of the stakes at Aqueduct, and a big thank you again to Sarah for joining me. And make sure to follow her on Twitter at the handle Outrun the Odds. Like I said, she's a great follow, particularly if you are betting and handicapping on that New York racing circuit. Now, remember, we have a lot of content for you this week. Yesterday, I posted my Grade 1 Clark Stakes preview taking place Friday at Churchill. And you also can get my picks for the Friday card at amalfimedia.com. And then on Friday, I'll drop my final preview of the week where I give my picks and analysis of the huge day at Del Mar, where the surf meets the turf. That features the Grade 1 Hollywood Derby, the Grade 2 Seabiscuit Handicap, and the Grade 3 Jimmy Durante Stakes. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but I may be joined by a very special guest / family member. It is Thanksgiving, so I might have a special guest with me for that Del Mar preview that I think everybody will enjoy, and certainly someone who is very knowledgeable about Southern California horse racing. Finally, just a reminder to follow, download, rate, and review the Win Place Show on the podcast platform of your choice, and subscribe to the Win Place Show on YouTube, in addition to following me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace for all of the great horse racing content you need to get you ready for the 2022 season. Until next time, friends, I'm Matthew DeSantis, wishing you and yours a happy and safe Thanksgiving, a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you that it's now post time.